Street, Pillars Fine Foods. A report prepared by Mr. Cotter, who's here to take any questions on it, I assume. Questions from Mr. Cotter? Seeing, yes, Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Just curious, understanding that, understanding the situation surrounding the development, I'm just curious whether or not we have any obligation to mention this to any of the residents in the affected area.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Bodley. City staff did provide notification out to those that were, or those that had expressed interest in the comprehensive zoning bylaw review. So we'd provide notice out through that forum to all those individuals who had originally expressed concern with respect to either the zoning bylaw comprehensive review and or the official plan amendment 22 that was the companion document to that review process. With respect to the proposed amendment, it generally is moving the property away from industrial towards residential to match the surrounding neighborhood. Again, I'm not sure anyone would really be objecting to that. We've seen lots of feedback from the community requesting general support to have the property eventually move in that direction.
Seeing no further questions, I'll look for somebody to move that. Councillor Veith, Councillor Vasek. All those in favor? All of us, thank you. Thank you, Joel. Now we begin the formal public meetings. For 13A, zoning bylaw amendment Z19. Okay, here we go. This is a formal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendment Z1902 to remove the holding symbol from 229, 231, 235, 239, and 249 Albert Street, known as 239 Albert Inc. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located at the desk at the rear of the chambers. There is more than one binder, so please make sure you're signing the appropriate one. Planner Dominic Simpson is available to answer any questions council may have. Questions from council? Seeing none. There are no registered delegations. Is there anyone present here tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Please. State your name and municipality for the record, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Megan Garrity. I live in Kitchener. I am a planning consultant with GSP Group, and I'm here this evening on behalf of the owner, Jacques Oprico, who's with us here, as well as Alex Schunard from PG Design Studio. I have no presentation tonight. I just wanted to say that we agree with the recommendations as presented in the report and that we're available if you have any further questions.
Check that out right now. Any questions for the delegate? Councillor Henry is here.
Hi, Megan. Thanks for coming. I heard you say that Alex from the architectural firm was here.
Yep.
Alex, could you come and join Megan at the podium for a second? I was reviewing among the submissions the urban design brief that was submitted by GSP, but it pulled your diagrams into it. So I think you're the better source of response to the question rather than the folks that put it in their report. I'm seeing the proposed floor plans for the application, and I'm seeing particularly in the podium diagrams showing that a number of one-bedroom plus den suites are present, but that they are smaller than almost all of the one-bedroom suites. And that is very confusing to me, that a one-bedroom unit would be larger than a one-bedroom plus den unit. And I was wondering if, as a professional architect, you could clarify for me what's going on in these pictures.
Well, I believe if I can recall the actual plan that you're referring to without seeing it in front of me, there's one plus den suites that are deeper. So we have a den within the back of the suite. I'm not sure the actual square footage of the suite is necessarily smaller, but it's just the arrangement, the composition of the actual suite. But they all work within the code. limits for spaces, requirements for spaces.
No further questions. Any further questions for the delegation here? Seeing none, thank you both. And I don't see any further delegations. If there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Councillor Henry.
I'd like to move a different motion than is listed in the agenda, and it riffs off of the deferral motion in Appendix A. I would keep
What page is
recommendation.
that?
It's page 64 of the packet.
Okay.
And happy to keep the first recommendation. The second one, that council directs staff to further evaluate the application after, this is what I'm adding, after receipt of clarification from the applicant's architect on the nature and size and difference between the various units proposed in the application. Happy to have that wordsmithed by staff after the fact.
So for further real details.
Yes, and I'll add some comments to that if I attract a seconder.
Councillor Vasic.
So I appreciate that the architect was present here to respond to the question, but there are at least a couple of the units on that floor that are the same depth and do appear to be wider in the plans that are there, and so further clarification I think is required to make sure that these units are going to comply with council's definitions around density, around what is and is not a bedroom, recognizing the stage that we're at. And since the applicant wasn't able to provide further information today, surely they can, in writing under their stamp and seal to staff, and staff can give it further review and information. And I'd be happy to take this back up at council as soon as staff have had the opportunity to review that further clarification to make sure it complies with our policies. Because if it is denser than is required on the site, happy to entertain a Section 37 application.
Questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? All of us, thank you. 13B. This is a formal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendment Z 1812 400 Northfield Drive West, the incorporated synod of the Diocese of Huron. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. With more than one binder, please make sure you're signing the appropriate one. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of this meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on April 11, 2019, and mailed or emailed on April 9, 2019, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on September 24, 2018, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. I'll now ask the planner, John Voss, to give us a brief overview of the application. Welcome, John.
Good evening, Mayor, Jaworski, councillors, and members of the public. The subject property at 400 Northfield Drive West is located in the Lakeshore North neighborhood, east of the Laurel Creek Conservation Area, and on the north side of Northfield Drive West. The land uses around the subject property are primarily single detached dwellings, and I've outlined the property in red on the image on your screen. The site is currently developed with a church, landscaping, and surface parking, which is accessed from a single driveway off High Point Avenue. The red line through the site indicates where the property will be divided for future development proposal, with one use on one side and another use on the other. The official plan designates the property as low-density residential, which permits a density of 150 bedrooms per hectare. The official plan also identifies Northfield Drive West as a regional arterial road, Westmount Road North is a major collector, and High Point Avenue is a minor collector. The zoning bylaw 2018-050 zones the property active zone change, or ZC. This zone was applied to properties where zone change applications were submitted prior to the zoning being approved in September 2018. The ZC zone recognizes the zoning that existed on the previous zoning bylaws. In this case, bylaw 1418 zoned the property as institutional with a height limit of 4 stories. The zone permits a range of institutional uses, but not residential uses. Just take a moment to note that a severance and minor variance application were approved by the Committee of Adjustment in November 2017 to sever the property along that dotted red line. At the same time, a minor variance was approved, which reduced the church parking rate to 6.75 spaces per 100 square meters of building floor area. This was based on the current parking requirements of the congregation. Although both applications were approved, certain conditions were not met within the 1-year time limit, so the applications are now void. The parking rate will be addressed through this zone change application, and a new severance application will be submitted in the future. This is a conceptual site plan for the proposed development. A new church will be constructed adjacent to the intersection of High Point Avenue and Northfield Drive West. The westerly parcel will be redeveloped with stacked townhouses containing up to 81 units. A total of 162 parking spaces are shown, with 72 on the church portion and 90 spaces on the residential portion. The plan has been recently updated with several minor changes which result in a better overall development. 3 units have been removed, reducing the overall density. More parking spaces and an amenity area were added internal to the property. The building fronting onto Westmount Road has been moved closer to Northfield Drive to provide additional landscaping buffer between the adjacent homes to the north. These building elevations are examples of the type of buildings that could be designed. The details will be refined through the site plan application to ensure a high quality of design. As mentioned, initially the applicant requested the zoning of the property from, Initially, the applicant requested to rezone the property from institutional 4 to medium density 3, which permits stacked townhouses. Site-specific amendments were requested, as noted on the screen, including reduced residential parking rate, landscaped open space, common recreation area, and internal setback. Those were all based on the 1418 zoning bylaw. Since submitting the application, Council has approved the new citywide zoning bylaw. The applicant has requested that residential 4 and residential 8 zones would be applied from the new zoning bylaw. These are appropriate for the proposed development. The residential portion of the updated concept plan will meet all of the regulations of the R8 zone. The church portion, which will be zoned residential 4, is the same zoning as the adjacent homes and permits spiritual uses, including a church. However, 2 site-specific regulations will be required for the church, specifically a reduced parking rate of 6.5 spaces for every 100 square meters of building floor area, and a reduced front yard and flankage yard setback. Staff have considered the application and proposed the following recommendations as outlined in the staff report. The first one would be staff recommends the residential portion of the property be rezoned to R8, and that in addition to the zoning regulations, that we increase the side yard setback to 8.4 meters along the north side property line, which will increase the buffer adjacent to the homes to the north. Staff also recommend that the church portion should be rezoned R4, that the front and flankage yard setback should be 6 meters, that the parking rate for the church should be 6.5 meters for every 100 square meters of building floor area. Staff also recommends that the owner should enter into a parking agreement with the city to allow parking to be shared between both portions of the property, and the city would be included in that agreement to ensure that it carries forward for the length of the development. And further, that council direct the site plan review committee to evaluate the site plan application against all urban design standards to ensure high quality of design as outlined in the report. This concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, John. Questions for our presenter, Councillor Freeman?
Through Mayor Jaworski. So I just want to confirm it's only a zoning bylaw amendment. It's not an official plan amendment.
Through Mr. Chair, that is correct. It's just a zoning application.
So essentially the official plan had envisioned this type of use.
Through Mr. Jaworski, Mayor Jaworski, the official plan designates a property as low density residential, which permits the density as proposed being 150 bedrooms per hectare.
And there's no height increase being requested in this application, is that correct?
That is correct.
And one last question, the traffic report didn't indicate that there was any level of failure at any of the nearby intersections?
Through Mr. Jaworski, the traffic study concluded that all of the intersections are working at a favorable level of service within the city standards.
Next up, Councillor. Oh, okay. Good. Further questions from Council. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, and thank you, John, for the presentation. Just to confirm in terms of where there is and isn't a parking variance request, there's no parking variance request on the residential side. And the visitor parking spaces from our new bylaw, because those were absent in some of our past regulations, have been carried forward. And that the only parking variance we're seeing relative to the previous C of A decision is literally 2 parking spaces on the church property.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, that is slightly correct. To explain a bit further, the residential portion of the property will meet the R8 zoning parking requirements, being 1 space per unit and 0.1 spaces per each unit, which would then be for visitor spaces. So there's 90 spaces for the 81 units. The church property, the R4 zone, or in general the entire bylaw, for every spiritual use in the city, the parking rate is 8.0 spaces per 100 square meters. That's being reduced to 6.5. The minor variance was 6.75, the difference being 2 spaces between the minor variance approval and what's being proposed in the final plan.
That sounds like what I said, but with the additional information of what the underlying R4 zoning is for. Okay.
Question from me. This is, are these still 2 separate properties?
They're just a single property today. A new site plan new severance application will be required to sever them in the future. So the previous severance application wasn't completed fully, and so within the 1-year time limit, the application has lapsed and is no longer relevant.
The reason why I ask, because it's come up before about the a second entrance onto West Mount Road North, which is sort of the front yard of that property, but it doesn't seem to have a driveway, but it's one contiguous property today.
That is correct.
Gotcha. Thanks. Councillor Freeman.
Just one last question. With regard to the variance for the front yard setback and the flankage yard setback, do you have any comments to add whether or not you think that that improves or lowers the pedestrian realm space in terms of your support for that setback?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, it's a good question, something that's relevant, and that's part of the consideration of a setback. Currently, under the institutional 4 zone, a setback of 5 meters is required. In the R4 zone, it's about 6 meters as well. However, spiritual use in the zoning is required to be pushed back even further. We're bringing it back to meet the minimum requirements. The public realm piece, the sidewalks are all off the property, and so the setbacks that are proposed should be sufficient in order to provide enough separation between building and pedestrians.
Councillor Bodley, Councillor Vassic.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Just curious, as we're seem to be increasing in density in many places throughout the city. I was, as a new councillor, and I'm not here to necessarily relitigate the official plan from 2012, but I was kind of surprised to see that this was not designated as a node or corridor of the city, and which would allow for potentially significantly more density than the current official plan is stating. And I'm curious if you have any commentary in that regard as to why this was designated as low density residential as opposed to something potentially higher, given the challenges we're facing with respect to growth in the city and density broadly speaking.
Is this a good time to call a friend, John, since it predates us, or are you good with that?
Sure, I'll answer.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Through Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Bodley, it's a fair point that the official plan was prepared in 2012. There's a lot of studies to justify density requirements, and at that time, in terms of where nodes and corridors were proposed, this was looked at as likely part of a suburban neighborhood and not part of a major corridor through the city, even though Northfield is an arterial road. There are other areas in the city that were identified as being the more ideal places for high and even higher densities. And so that's where the density allocation was directed. It's not to say that in a number of years that'll be changed in terms of where the city's at, but under the planning framework for the day, nodes and corridors that were planned at the time were very scoped to areas that were more relevant at that time.
Very good question. Councillor Vassic, Councillor Freeman.
Thanks, through you, Mayor Jaworski. It's a related question. I'm just curious about the rationale from going from 3 bedrooms to 1 to 2, and then how doing so, or if doing so, supports the diversification of the total range of mix of housing options in the neighborhood.
Through Mayor to Councillor Vassic. The range and variety of units compared to the rest of the subdivision provides a whole new type of product that doesn't currently exist in the neighborhood. So even though they're just 1 and 2 bedroom, it provides a new option for people that are looking for something that's a bit more affordable than having a single detached home. The 2 bedroom option would be available for families that have a child or 2. The 3 bedroom units are a struggle to provide, and we're looking at options and how that can be encouraged through development charges or other options. But the variety of unit sizes that are shown in terms of the bedroom allowances, I think still provides a variety of different housing options within the neighborhood.
Okay, and I'm just trying to understand what you're saying there. So you're saying that if we're trying to kind of incentivize for 3 bedrooms, you're saying 3 bedrooms of this type of dwelling are something we need in the city more of? Is that what you're implying? Okay.
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Vassic, that is definitely something of relevance as we look at families are looking for places to live. I think there is still an opportunity within the development that the unit configuration can be adjusted, all those sort of details. Those will be dealt through site plan, and perhaps the applicant can provide some more details in terms of what the final unit layout could be and how bedrooms could be allocated.
Okay, good. Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
So just adding clarity to that answer. So if I read the recommendation correctly as you've prepared it, you're saying there is flexibility provided they stay under the 150 bedrooms per hectare density to fluctuate if they had a market for a 3 bedroom.
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Freeman, that is correct. Through site plan, the zoning regulations will still apply, but there's some flexibility within that.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, John. We now move into delegations, and first up is Mr. Trevor Hawkins from MHBC. Welcome back, Trevor.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of council. I don't think there's a whole lot more I can add to John's presentation. I did want to maybe just highlight a couple things on the site plan. We did look, and I know John addressed it in his staff report, about an access out to Westmount Road, and there were concerns from the region about the proximity of that access to the signalized intersection. And our traffic study prefers an entrance from High Point, because High Point has 4 lanes in this area. So if I turn on to High Point and I'm waiting to turn left into the site, if that situation were to occur, there's a lane to the right of me where someone can pass and travel further into the neighborhood. And there's opportunities to optimize the signalization of High Point Avenue to improve its efficiency. And looking ahead to 2023, the traffic study was suggesting level of service B, which is, it goes from A to F, and B being second best for both of those signalized intersections, plus the site entrance. So this particular area is performing at a very high level, actually, of service for such a busy road. In terms of the unit, just to speak to some of the questions that came up that John was doing his best to answer, the density at 150 bedrooms per hectare allows a certain number of bedrooms on this site. We haven't nailed down the exact floor plans. We submitted sort of concept floor plans for staff to review, just to get a sense of how the units would be laid out. Usually there would be sort of a two or 1 bedroom unit layout, but there's an opportunity with a 2-floor unit on some of these to explore a 3 bedroom option. We would obviously have to make adjustments to some of the other units to make sure the density worked. It was never our intention to go beyond 150 bedrooms per hectare or 10 meters in height. and one of the questions that came up was about the official plan and whether this particular site needed an amendment. The official plan actually has a number of tests. Before official plan amendment number 22, those tests applied to an apartment. And so there were certain tests that you would measure whether an apartment would be an appropriate use for a site like this. And in our submission as part of our original application, we went through those tests, even though they didn't apply to a stacked townhouse at the time. And it does meet the test. So it actually meets the tests in the official plan to allow an apartment building up to 4 stories on this site because of its location criteria and a number of the other policies under consideration. Official plan amendment number 22 increased that test to apply to stacked townhomes, and it still meets those tests. So it's the official plan considers a stacked townhouse an appropriate land use for this property, and we fully agree with that. One of the side benefits of this is that we get to also build a new church on this site, and all of the positive impacts that has on the community. A lot of the new communities that are being built, if we look on the perimeter of Waterloo in Councillor Beaudely's ward and Councillor Freeman's ward. Well, Councillor Freeman's ward perhaps has a few more than Councillor Beaudely's ward, but the new subdivisions don't have all of these community amenities, spiritual uses, and Mayor Jaworski, you know how hard it is sometimes to introduce spiritual uses into neighborhoods that are already established. So here we have a situation where we're trying to recreate a spiritual use in the same location so that the community and those in the surrounding area are able to continue to benefit from that amenity. And I know Reverend Levesque will speak further to the needs of the church and how important this application is for them. But I just wanted to highlight some of those other community benefits associated with this mixed-use development. Thank you.
First up, Councillor Veith and Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you, Trevor. I have to ask about stacked townhouses and if units can be accessible, and if there's a plan, because I certainly think that we need to be accessible for folks that need those accommodations. Is that possible?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Veith, it certainly behooves who's ever building and selling any type of product to make them as accessible to people throughout all stages of life. So I think we have had conversations with staff about that already, and it's our intention to explore some of the units and make them, there'll be different ways to make them accessible. We'll try and make them at grade accessible. There are some challenges with the grading on this site, but there are other ways to make them accessible, and we'll certainly be looking to do that.
Councillor Freeman.
Through Mayor Jaworski, I just would like you to better describe the pedestrian realm on High Point and Northfield Drive, because I want to make sure that from a active transportation perspective that lens has been given consideration, and it'll be something that you'll bring with you through into the site plan side of this application.
Certainly. I think the question that John was asked about the church and why the church was pushed a little bit closer to the street. Well, one of the elements along Northfield Drive is that the church will have the same setback as the stacked townhomes. So there'll be a uniform street wall along Northfield. They'll all be 6 meters from the property line. So Northfield Drive, if I'm walking along Northfield Drive today, there's some landscaping, but mostly it's going to be surface parking all the way from High Point. The church is set quite a distance from the Northfield sidewalk, so there isn't much of a streetscape to be had on Northfield today. The new development will have the church front and center at the corner at the signalized intersection when I first come into the area, and then as I'm traveling towards Westmount and Northfield, I'll have active building designs that are articulated. The main entrances, so the stairs that get into the units, will be from where people park, but there'll be balconies and other design features where there'll be people living in their units and experiencing the area by virtue of their balconies, and some of the landscaping that's around the units that back onto Northfield, as well as the large landscape area to bring people into the site from the corner of Westmount and Northfield. So, and then as I travel further up on the multi-use path going up Westmount, again, we have units framing the street all the way up to the property line. We wanted to make sure we gave enough separation from that north property line so the units are farther back than the bylaw requires, So that allows us to do some screening and some landscaping in that area, but also allows us to address the streetscape as well on Westmount.
So from an urban design lens, you're looking to articulate those facades and create an active space there?
Yes, through you, Mayor Jaworski. We're not intending to create the main physical entrance to the units there, but we are recognizing that they face two busy and important streets, and the designs will be recognize that.
Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I maybe piggybacking a little bit on what Councillor Freeman was referencing. I know our advisory committee on active transportation had suggested that we create a pedestrian connection to Westmount Road. And I would echo those comments. I can imagine that the landscaped area in the southwest corner there is likely to be used as an access point for people getting out that way from a pedestrian perspective anyways. And maybe if you could speak a little bit to what that landscape portion on the southwest corner might look like, and whether or not the possibility of having a trail or some sort of connectivity to the road, or even out to Northfield in that area, but close to Westmount.
Absolutely. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Bodley. This is a fairly large area, and we purposely left a large area at the corner so that we could create an entrance feature. So it would be a pedestrian connection. There could be lots of different things that we could do there. Certainly getting people into the site is one of the goals, but there's lots of different ways to do that, and there's enough room here to do it creatively and to make it look attractive. So it's certainly a prominent corner of the site, and we want to make sure that it draws people into the site, and it's pleasing to look at as I'm walking on either of those two streets, and I want to explore it further. So we left that space so that we had some flexibility to not only bring people into the site, but to do it in a very high level of design. There is an option to provide another connection at the back end of the site here. We want to make sure we have enough space to do trees along here. There's some trees that we're keeping that you can see on the site plan here. So we're going to be sensitive to providing a connection out here as well as a landscape buffer. But we hope there should be space to accommodate both of those things.
Thank you. Councillor Vasic, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thanks for bringing up that point. Also, as a new councillor, I guess this application went through the Active Transportation Committee and they got a chance to comment on it. Is that what happened? Yes. So I'm just curious about if development applications, or if this one, maybe I missed the meeting, do they go through the Advisory Committee on Culture as well? Because I know one of the community benefits is public art throughout the community as well. So I was curious if they had an opportunity to comment on it, and I just missed.
Well, I would love to answer that question, but I think probably John should answer that question.
You're right.
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Vasic. It has not been submitted specifically to the, what was the committee called again?
Great.
Cultural.
Okay, this is great. Yeah, Advisory Committee on Culture. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, it hasn't been provided specifically to them, but all of our plans and everything are available to all committees, and we'd be open to have those discussions.
Great, thank you. Is that still, just asking about process now, is that still something that can happen after an informal public meeting?
Well, right now we'll do the formal public meeting, which we have now, but then there's still all the work to do with site plan on that. So I might look to Mr. Rapp or Joel for just information on how a process might include other committees or committee members or citizens for that matter.
Certainly. Well, the site plan process is not a public process.
No.
We always, if residents come to the counter and they look at plans and have questions or make suggestions, then our site plan review committee will take that into consideration. And with respect to after the formal hearing going out to committees of council, as long as it's related to site plan matters and not the land use or the regulations that are being discussed tonight and council would make a decision on one way or the other, then absolutely there's still that dialogue that can occur on the site of how the site will operate.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Sorry, just for clarity, can someone comment? I didn't think the public art policy applied to a residential development like this. And I thought it was related to capital projects, public capital projects. Can anyone give me advice on that?
Mr. Cotter can.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Freeman, you're correct. It applies to city projects, not private projects.
Okay. Go ahead.
So with regard to the new policy that we did with privately owned public spaces, so the POPs, does this landscaped area that Mr. Hawkins, the 2 spaces that he just mentioned for the potential trail connections, does that fall under that new document, or because this was applied for before that, it doesn't? I don't know.
Mr. Cotter.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Freeman. The proposed redevelopment of the property will be subject to a parkland dedication. So through that process, which is required prior to the issuance of a building permit, we would determine either a cash and lieu payment, or there is the possibility that the applicant could advance a POPs for which a parkland dedication reduction may be granted in part, provided that the public has free access to that, communal park space, if you will.
Mr. Rapp.
Certainly, and if I can just add that the POPs, while it was presented as part of the Uptown Public Realm study, we still need to work out some of the criteria and values and a number of different things, or even the first application that come forward that we can start testing some of those criteria and values. Okay. But it's a good question, absolutely, and we want to make utilization of POPs in the future, but we still have a couple of things to work out, and the first one that comes in, that could be a good example whenever that occurs. Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next up, Mr. Jeff Sage, local resident. Welcome, Mr. Sage.
I want to thank everyone who I had an opportunity to speak with last week and over the weekend. I really appreciate your time. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue tonight. I spoke before. I spoke last at the informal meeting back in September, and I've been accused by some that I'm a not in my backyard person, and I want to make it clear that that's not the case. I really strongly feel that I get it. We need development. We need housing in Waterloo. And I know that we're restricted by boundaries of the city and we can't go into the townships. I get that. I really value the urban land and the rural countryside. And I see the opportunity to develop 400 Northfield. I can accept conditions need to change. They've changed with respect to the church. I can see an opportunity here to sell off some of the land to development. However, I have to ask, does this development fit into the regional plan? When I look through the regional plan, it talks about 3-story stacked townhouses being considered apartments, and they're not considered a good fit in a low-density established neighborhood like Lakeshore North. So that's information coming out of the planning document. On Sunday, I spent a fair bit of time, maybe that's why some of you couldn't get a hold of me. I was out canvassing the neighborhood, and almost all, I'm not going to say all, almost all of the neighbors that I spoke to had some concerns. They had the same concerns as I did. Some of them had other concerns. One of the concerns that came up that I didn't even think of was, what about noise? Because Northfield is a regional road, because Northfield has a high volume of traffic, residents that back onto Northfield have complained for years about noise. Does this development take into consideration the noise impact? Because now it's going to be a big bouncer, and the sound's going to be bouncing off the new development across the street and amplified into the old established Lakeshore people. A number of the concerns that were raised are the same as mine. So the concerns that I have about the development are the size. I don't think it fits in the lot. We can look at the zoning that it existed in September when I presented the first time, and there were a number of exemptions that were being asked for to get approval to put this through. I'm still seeing a number of exemptions being required to put this through. So one has to ask the question, is it just too big for the space? Is it your 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag? It just doesn't fit. I like the way the church is being moved to the corner. I really feel that that's a good thing. I feel the church is a valuable asset in our community, and I would hate to lose it. I just feel that the development is going to be too dense. It's going to require too high units that now will be perhaps nicely landscaped at ground level, but when we're looking from the 3rd floor into the people on Corner Brook, an established neighborhood, looking into their backyards, looking into their back windows, when we're looking from the Northfield side across the street into the Lakeshore neighbors, that's a big change. And I'm not sure that this is fitting the height requirement, or the height allowance, I don't think fits. Are the number of units too much that it requires us to go 3 stories? That's one of the things I ask. Going back to the regional plan, it says it's not a good fit to put medium density 3-story stacked townhouses are considered apartments into a 1- and 2-story neighborhood like Lakeshore North. Because I feel the development's too big, I have concerns about parking. We are still in an area where, or still in an era of a 2-car family being the norm. And where are the people going to park? Putting more bedrooms in are going to be putting more smaller units, are going to be putting more student housing in where there's going to be more cars. Being a resident of Lakeshore North for the past 38 years, we were an original homeowner. I've seen traffic develop at that intersection of High Point and Northfield. It's a through intersection. So when we compound car traffic having 3 choices to go straight through down High Point, to make a turn to go on to Northfield and head towards Conestoga Mall, or take a turn onto Northfield and head down to Westmount, we've got a very, very busy intersection. And it's an extremely short distance from that intersection to the church driveway. It's extremely short. And when you want to come out of the church driveway and immediately turn left onto Northfield, that's going to be a big challenge. We have bus traffic, that's a major bus route. And when the ION gets going, we're going to find bus schedules change to move more people towards the train. We also have children walking from the Lakeshore North neighborhood into or across that intersection to get to High Point, to get to N.A. McEachern. There is a crossing guard, but that crossing guard can only be at one corner at one time. So it's going to be a challenge to get those kids on that side of the street down and safely across to school. Keeping the church is important. I have to emphasize that. And that the changes in the church's environment, moving it to the corner, I like. I was upset with the number of exemptions that it still requires. The church has to be exempted in its setback and its parking. But I think I could live with that. The current concerns that I have to do with the balance point. And I consider the balance point kind of like this. In order, the neighborhood needs to not be significantly impacted and changed. And putting 3 stories in, I think is a significant change. I can currently see the church roof and the steeple from our bedroom upstairs because that's the way the house looks. But the church has always been there. We've always been there. It's not a big change. Putting in the stacked townhomes, now that I think will change it significantly. So the balance point has to take into consideration change to the neighborhood. Some is going to happen. I understand that. The balance has to be between the church being able to survive and having a huge property that it has to deal with. It could now have a smaller, newer facility that is more manageable with the selling off of the property. And I get it that the developer has to be satisfied. But all those things I think have to be in order where the established community is not significantly impacted. We're going to have to deal with the change. I get that. I can see the change happening around us, down in Beaver Creek area, and that's going to impact traffic as well. I get it, and I don't want to be accused of saying no development, no development. Pare it down a little bit, a few less units, and I think everybody can win. There has to be a point where we can all be happy with it. I get it that we need to develop, but I think it needs to be within reason. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Sage. Questions for the delegate? I had one just on height you mentioned. Were you concerned about the heights of the impending church or the new church or the new units?
The church isn't the issue. When we look out and when any neighbor that's facing our way is looking out towards the conservation area, kind of down Westmount, we are now going to have, 4 or 5 units that are now going to be up imposing themselves in the same space where the very narrow peak of the church is and the cross on the church.
Because I'll have a question of staff, but I'm pretty sure they're actually below 10 meters, so it's below what the existing neighborhood is, or it's set what the existing neighborhood. I'll get clarity from staff on that,
Okay.
so I just want to find out. Yes, go ahead, Councilor Beath.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for coming, Jeff. So what would be your, seeing that this will be developed or would eventually be developed, what for you would be ideal on that property?
Ideally, we keep the church, and then we put in maybe where all the units aren't exactly the same cookie cutter height. We stack them, we stagger them, we move them around a little bit. We have some that are 2, some that are 3, but we vary it. It's now going to be this block, and I think that would be a way that we could reduce the number so that we have more space for parking because there are fewer units in there for people. But we do need housing, I get that. We've had that discussion. Make it just a little bit shorter. That's a little bit lower.
Any further questions for the delegates? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Sage.
Thank you.
And I have a question of staff to John. What would be the building height that would be common that area? I would have guessed it would be 10 meters, and if I'm reading this report right, these are about 10 meters. Can you comment on that?
Yep. So to respond to that, the zoning and the official plan both permit a height of 10 meters. An average house being 2 stories would be less than that. Probably be in the range of 7.5 to 8 meters. So the 10-meter height will allow 3 stories, which is still relatively equivalent to the 2.5 stories of what houses commonly are. I don't know for certain if there's side splits or bungalows or other styles of houses adjacent to this property, which would be part of the consideration for sure. Mm-hmm. But in terms of height, we see the 10 meters as consistent and appropriate, equivalent to what's in the neighborhood already.
Mm-hmm. Because if you were to build a new house or rebuild a house, say in Lakeshore, you could build one that was 10 meters, much like we see on Lexington. Really, we see a lot of houses that they're very much pushing limits, but they are 10 meters or under, I believe. Are they 10 and a half? Oh, big houses in that neighborhood. Yeah, so that would be consistent with that. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Next up, Reverend Pastor Marty Levesque, All Saints Anglican Church.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, staff, and fellow citizens. My name is Pastor Marty Levesque, and I am the parish priest at All Saints Anglican Church at 400 Northfield Drive West. I've asked to speak tonight because the decision you are being asked to make does not exist in a vacuum, but rather it has a past and a future. And it is to both the past and the future I wish to speak tonight, so that you have as many facts before you so that you can make the best decision possible. So first to the past. In 1981, All Saints Anglican Church, with our partners, Waterloo North Presbyterian Church, purchased equal shares of the land at 400 Northfield Drive West, and we proceeded to build a church in the neighborhood. It was the first construction in the neighborhood, actually. And in 1997, we added a new sanctuary. Unfortunately, 5 to 6 years after that, Waterloo North Presbyterian Church ran into financial problems. And funding to the LCC, which is the Laurel Church Center, the governing board that cared for the building and property, was made up of equal parts Anglicans and Presbyterians, was forced to cut their budget dramatically. And so only basic funding for the building janitorial, snow removal, and lawn maintenance was built into the yearly budget. As such, other repairs were made on an emergency basis, and the building was allowed to fall into disrepair. Currently, I need 3 different roofs on the building. In 2012, Waterloo North Presbyterian Church came to an end of its life cycle, and ownership of their share of the property reverted to their national church polity, the Presbyterian Church of Canada, who gave All Saints Anglican Church a choice: buy their share or sell and leave. Knowing we could not afford to purchase the building and also repair it, All Saints began an extensive consultation with our own church polity, the Diocese of Huron, the parishioners of All Saints, community groups that use our facilities, and the neighborhood itself. Through our extensive canvassing and consultation process, we discovered there was indeed a need and a desire for the church to stay there, and to stay in Lakeshore North. So we decided at that time to step out in faith. We decided to purchase the building knowing that we would need to redevelop the property if we were to remain in Lakeshore North. Otherwise, we have to close and sell it. And in 2014, after a massive internal capital campaign, we raised $700,000, but we were forced to take a mortgage for $700,000 to purchase the property. Over the next 2 years, we worked extensively with local developers and came up with a proposal that is before you. And I want to take a moment to thank Malua Blamey and Aberdeen Homes, our partners, who recognize the importance of the church and the community. They've agreed to allow us to remain in the old church while the new church is being constructed. And once the new church has been built, then and only then will the old church be taken down and the townhomes go in. This will allow for uninterrupted services for our parish community, but also for all the services that we provide to the neighborhood. They will not end. The site will stay active the whole time. That's the past and how we got here. Now to the future. The development that is before you will allow All Saints to free itself from its mortgage completely, enter into a new church, and overall lower our operating expenses by a total of $100,000 a year. This will ensure our financial viability for the next 25 years. Currently, All Saints Anglican Church is made up of 300 families with an average Sunday of attendance about 110 to 120. That's over 2 different services. Currently, our parking lot needs are around 50 to 60 parking spots at our main service. Obviously, this does not take in consideration Christmas and Easter. You're all welcome to come any other time, though. But All Saints doesn't exist in a vacuum. Currently, we donate in our mission outreach approximately $30,000 a year to the neighborhood. This takes many forms. It is outlined in the package that was distributed to you on the All Saints Mission Report. It is Appendix A. Currently, All Saints gives free room rentals to Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, and the Lakeshore North Neighborhood Association. I've also attached letters of support from all those organizations for you with the report that I provided. The Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, and Neighborhood Association are all looking forward to the new expanded facilities. The church is not actually getting smaller, staying the same size, but will have updated and better and new facilities that will serve the neighborhood better and serve the community at large, and they are all unanimous in their support of this project. The reduction in operating costs will also allow All Saints to shift some of our resources and move them into our outreach operation budgets. We anticipate going from our current $30,000 a year we give away to the neighborhood to $50,000 a year in funds, in gifts, free room rentals, and other activities. This means that over the coming 25 years of financial stability, we're able to project we will put into the Lakeshore North neighborhood $1.25 million in economic value, because the church is the only institution in the world that exists for the people who don't come, and we're happy to do that. This is, of course, if you say yes. A no tonight would mean that we would not be able to afford our mortgage, our operating budget, and the building repairs. We would have to close and sell the property, and all our outreach each and every year, that $30,000 I mentioned, and moving up to that $50,000 that we would soon approach, would come to an end. All the community groups would lose their free spaces and use of all of our facilities, our halls, our kitchens, and everything else. Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, neighborhood associations would be looking for a new home, and if you've been in Lakeshore North, there's not very many community spaces. This has been a very long and arduous journey for us at All Saints. It began in 2012. It's been a 6-year process. To borrow a sports metaphor, for us, it's the fourth quarter, there's seconds on the clock, and this is our Hail Mary pass. We could win tonight or we can lose, but the ball's in your court, and so we give it to you, Council. And with that, if you have any questions or if there's any clarification I can provide, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you very much. And to Council, this is your chance to get a 100% truthful answer, because we have Pastor Marty here. Not saying anything against Mr. Voss and Trevor, but we've got 100% truthful answers. First on the list, Councilor Veith.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for coming, Marty. I just want to know a little bit about in the space that you're going to be providing. Is there going to be a kitchen, a community kitchen area? I know how desperate we are in the neighborhood for community space, and I know if it was built and new, and right now you'd be full, and you will be down the road. But yeah, just a little bit about the amenities inside.
Thank you. Through you, through Mayor Jaworski. I'm sorry, I can't call you Your Worship. The new building will have an industrial kitchen that will be that is obviously open for use for all of our tenants and facilities. We've already been in contact with Better Begin in Waterloo to make them and to build a community hub where we could provide more outreach to the neighborhoods, especially to McEachran, the school across the street, because we want to make sure those kids get a good, healthy education, but good after-school activities as well. There will also be a full-size gym facility, basketball court, and we're planning things like Friday night open gym nights for the neighborhood kids to make sure that the kids in the neighborhood don't have to spend their time. If you follow the Facebook page, you know we've had a lot of break-ins in cars. Hopefully then the kids don't have to spend time wandering around the neighborhood, but can play some ball, can get off the streets, and can have a safe place to gather. So that's some of our main facilities that we have. We do have a second floor that will be in the church that is not completely developed, so there's still opportunities to work. We've been in contact with Jeremy from Life Change Adventures and looking to, as I said, to create that community hub of service for the neighborhood.
Bassett, please.
Thanks. I have through you, Mayor. I have two questions. One is probably for staff just to understand. So if it didn't go through, then what happens? And you have to, I don't know, you have to do something, and then what would happen from the city? This is just for my own, and maybe Councillor Bott, you might know our benefit.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, the property would continue to be zoned ZC, which would permit the institutional uses that are currently permitted, including a church, community centers, those sort of variety of uses. but with the expectation that at some point a zoning would be applied to the property to bring it into conformity to the new zoning bylaw.
Thank you. And then this is for you. One of the neat things that I'm hearing from the theater community and arts community is that there are very small tweaks that can be made in new development. So for example, the CG building in their auditorium could have made just some very small tweaks to make it into a viable theater space. So I just wanted to share that with you in case there was any opportunity to have those conversations. Should this decision move forward, that would be something that would be probably worthwhile just to have a few conversations about if you're interested. And arts and theater are also great for youth who have been marginalized. And just, I mean, maybe also as an aside, I've worked with youth in my own career, and you know, maybe it's the youth who are taking things from cars, but let's not, I don't know, assume. Yeah, okay.
Just to comment to that through you, Mr. Mayor, if you're not busy this Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, we are holding a concert in the main sanctuary that has been already been put on. We do work with the arts community to put on and use our sanctuary not just as a building that we worship in on Sundays, because that would be poor stewardship if all we did was use it on Sundays. So we do open it up for concerts and at a much reduced rate of rent for those who are putting the concert on. So we're happy to continue to do so.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, 4th Delegate Mike Craddock, Lakeshore North Neighborhood Association. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, welcome, or hi. Not sure I'm going to top that one. Marty got a lot of the points here I have covered already. Hello, City Council and my fellow community members. My name is Mike Craddock, and I'm a volunteer with the Lakeshore North Neighborhood Association. First thing I just want to note, Marty, we're going to hold you to that $50,000 promise. I had the opportunity to speak at the last zone change meeting, and would like to provide some council with some feedback from our community members. We continue to support the church and the project and the community space. After discussing with the residents, two of the main concerns that we noticed from a lot of our residents was the increased traffic and increased parking, specifically on High Point and Wintergreen. Residents were concerned that the traffic would be an issue, especially getting to work in the mornings, and that they were afraid that there would be overflow parking onto the streets by their houses. After discussing with local residents and council members, we would recommend that if it's possible to look at putting a driveway or an entranceway on the Westmount Road. That would help alleviate the traffic from our neighborhood and from our residents, so that way it keeps the new development separate from the community that's already there. A lot of our residents feel that it's already pretty full as it is. I know that some residents are disgruntled with this process, might have been as transparent as they would have liked, but the church has worked with residents, has worked with communities, and has changed the plan several times to accommodate our community and our needs. I know just recently they dropped the number of units from 84 units to 81 units now. They've been doing a bunch of small changes and working with us on that. Yes, change can be uncomfortable, but we live in a vibrant and growing city. A few decades ago, a large portion of North Lake subdivision was covered in just cornfields, and now it's covered in houses. I guess that goes without saying. A new set of townhouses might not be the most ideal for some of our community, but is the best option we have available to us right now. The church is falling apart, and one way or another, it won't be here in the next decade. The question before us today is, what do we want to replace it with? Do we want to leave it an abandoned church that's falling apart? Do we want to leave it as a Walmart, a plaza, or do we want a few affordable dwellings with a brand new church? I am personally not a religious person, but I believe the church has an integral part in our community. We either can fight the change or be a part of the solution. With this zone change, we can keep our church and we can keep our community space. In conclusion, we would like to recommend that the council look at putting a driveway or an entranceway on the Westmount Road to reduce traffic in our neighborhood. But we continue to support the project and look forward to seeing everyone at our new community space. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mike. And questions for the delegate. Councillor Freeman.
Through Mayor Jaworski, can you just help me to understand how you solicited feedback from the neighborhood association? I was looking on the Facebook page. It looks like you have just over 1,400 members. Like, was there a comment there? Did you go out to doors?
So some of the feedback that we had, through you, Mr. Jaroski. I'm not sure everyone ever says through you, but so some of the things that we've noticed was, first, our Facebook page. We have over 1,300 members now on Facebook. There was a vibrant discussion on there. We also have community members that we talk through with our various programs and stuff. Like we had our recent, Angela was there actually, we had our cleanup in the park for Earth Day and stuff. So when we see members, we interact with them and hear their feedback. Unfortunately, I don't believe, if I'm correct off the top of my head, anyone came out to our meetings to discuss this. But I noticed last time when we had the last zone change meeting, several members approached me that were too shy to come forward or too intimidated to come forward. And the big thing was that we've heard was through our Facebook and through the members was the traffic and the parking they were concerned about on their street. Some of the bigger things. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
My benefit, where is the Lakeshore North Neighborhood Association? What streets is it bounded by? The church side or the other side?
So the Lakeshore North is bounded by Westmount, Northfield, Benjamin, and Weaver.
Oh, so that entire swath of...
The entire swath
okay.
there.
Okay.
And just for the record too, we don't have a community space right now. If we were to rent from the school, we'd have to pay for a janitor to be there, which is, we can't afford that. With our budget, we have about a $2,000 a year budget. With that, we rent through the church. The church gives us space for free. Because of that, we were able to do what we do. And if it wasn't for the church, we wouldn't have our association today. We wouldn't have a space for people to meet up. So
really in that Lakeshore North, it's the church, schools, and that's it? Or the church, North Lake Woods School?
Correct.
Is any McEachern in there, or is that on the other side?
That's at the other side.
That's the other side, so just
Lakeshore South.
Yeah. Okay. Further questions? Councillor Vassic.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I'm just wondering, I asked the question about of staff about the alternative entrance on Westmount. So I'm just wondering if staff could just speak to that to share with the public.
Well, let's see if we have, do you have any further questions for the delegate?
Oh, I'm sorry. Right. See, I don't even know the process yet either.
Okay. Cool. I think you can rest easy now, Mike.
Okay. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of staff. Councillor Vassic.
As before. I don't know.
As before. So through you, Bear. The driveway access onto High Point is something that we've looked at and compared it with what would it look like if there was a driveway onto Westmount Road. I've had some discussions with my colleagues in the transportation department, both at the city but also at the region, because they would be close to the intersection of Westmount and Northfield Drive. And for a number of reasons, it was deemed that that would be an unsafe condition compared to the driveway as it currently exists on High Point Avenue for a variety of different reasons, and I'd be happy to get into those reasons. But ultimately, it was a safety factor. The volume of traffic on Westmount is far greater than what is on High Point, even though at the peaks of the day, there is congestion at that intersection on High Point Avenue. Putting it onto Westmount would be the worser of the two decisions.
Through
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, just clarification on that. Is it possible to have two driveways, one out to what as it is now, and another one out to Westmount? And from what I read and from what I understand, it's not impossible, that it is possible to have an exit out onto Westmount Road. Because right now it's not a long distance from the light to the current driveway, and it would be the same or close to the same if it was from Northfield, on Westmount from Northfield to wherever the driveway would go. I know it would involve some reconfiguration of the stacked townhomes, but I kind of envisioned it as two driveways rather than one, because I know it's at peak times when the crossing guard's there on Northfield. It's been hit and miss a few times, so I'm really concerned about safety at that corner. And if some of that can be relieved onto Westmount, I would be happy with that. Sorry,
through you, Mayor Jaworski again. To answer the question, the option of having a two driveway scenario, a driveway off High Point for the church and a driveway off onto Westmount for the residential portion of the development. One concern would be through traffic cutting through the property, which makes a very unsafe situation on the property. Now the property or the parking area could be divided into two separate parking areas with no physical or drive-through connection between them. It wouldn't be as efficient, and again, it raises all the driveway or the traffic issues on Westmount Road, which is a major collector, which more so links traffic from roads to roads. It doesn't work functionally to have driveways off of Westmount. I think the only driveway on Westmount right now is to the Laurel Creek Conservation Area.
Onward, we have correspondence here from Richard Lambert that we have, but that's the end of our formal delegations. Is there anyone here present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Please come on up, state your name and municipality, please. And you'll have up to 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Heather Van Dorn, and I live directly behind the church. And I'm here with a bunch of my neighbors tonight who all live behind the church. We've had a lot of discussions since this topic has been brought up. And first of all, we want to say we support the church. 100% we support the church. We like the idea that there is a church in the neighborhood. Nobody is disputing that. It's just a given. But there is some concerns, and actually a lot of my concerns are the same as Mr. Sage, so I'm going to be repeating basically what Mr. Sage had said earlier. So, one, a lot of my neighbors with these stacked townhouses, we feel that we're being railroaded into the type of density, and we're not being heard. And we're not happy with the height of these townhouses, and we're not happy with the density. I'm just going to throw it out there and tell you we're not happy with it. And again, it's the same thing. The traffic there's going to be all of these things that come out of this high density neighborhood as characteristics that come out of this description now. So we're looking to amend it to fit in with the rest of the neighborhood, and we're looking for you to give us good governance to do so. So so the traffic is a concern. If we could have 2 exits, 2 entrances, that would help. That's one idea. Another idea was the proximity to our properties. So we're concerned about how close these stacked townhouses are going to be to the back of our property lines, and the idea of privacy, the idea of shadows, not having the same feeling as what we have right now in our neighborhood is really going to change our neighborhood completely. Another one that Mr. Sage had mentioned and a lot of us have talked about is the impending noise, just the sheer volume of more people that are going to be living in the neighborhood. Then you're going to have the type of townhouses that are going up. You're going to have an echoing effect. There's going to be all kinds of characteristics of noise, and it's really going to change the whole feel of the neighborhood. The other thing that I agree with Mr. Sage was the idea that these townhouses are stacked and cookie cutter and not fitting in with the general design of the rest of the neighborhood. And then my last point is about fencing. We all have kind of private fences that are back in this back to the back of our property lines. I'm wondering when they build this, are they going to put one fence continuous across the back just to make it even and uniform? And that's basically it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions of the delegation? Seeing none, thank you. Is there anyone else present here tonight? I didn't catch. Oh, welcome Jane Mitchell. How are you, Jane?
Oh, I'm great. I'm great. Well, things are good. So I just wanted to speak in favor of the development. Now I am a member of the church and have been since I was 7 years old. So yeah, I am a little biased. But I also live in Lakeshore. I live in 604 Dogwood Lane. And my daughter and her family live on North Lake. So my daughter and her family, they're young children, and they do cross at Northfield to the school, and that road is always busy, and it will remain busy. You were asking, Councillor Freeman was asking about the environmental and things like that, and I just want to say, when I go to church, I have walked to that church. I often walk to that church when the weather's really bad. Drive, yeah, we're bad, but you can easily walk from my house, a very pleasant walk along the side of McEachran. You cross over Northfield, and then I walk up Northfield to an entrance right now that's to the church as well. And it's very easy, very safe. It's you can ride your bike there too. And my daughter's family also walk to the church as well. So it's something that's really a neighborhood hub there, and it's walkable. And as mentioned earlier, the bus, the number 9 bus, stops right at the church. So we would hope with the coming of the LRT whenever, that, sorry, I can say that now. Anyway, yeah. Hopefully June,
Pastor
right?
Marty to pray for us on that one.
Yeah, anyway. That people from that area and from our area will be taking the number 9 and taking it up to the LRT stop and using public transit. So just that. I'm not going to comment on the regional plan because I would have to find the pages that it is, but I just know that generally with the regional plan, we're looking at density in the urban areas. And this is, this is a piece of density. I also want to mention that we've got Beaver Creek Co-op that's quite dense. And also if you go around the corner on North Lake, you will come, now of course it's not right in that area, but just round the corner, you have small apartment buildings that are 4 or 5 or 6 stories. So it's not really that North Lake area has, is all single family homes. My daughter lives in a semi-detached, so, there is a variety. I personally like variety in building and have been very happy over the years with the way Lakeshore has grown with a variety of buildings, and that's my personal feeling. Noise, 18 years of listening to noise and things. In fact, I think the townhouses, from what I understand from my experience, will help prevent noise for the people that live behind the townhouses. I'm not necessarily sure the noise will bounce off the townhouses into my area, but I can hear the expressway at midnight, so, yeah, and that's just how it is in the neighborhood. So I don't know if you have any more questions, but certainly my family, both generations, are very much in favor of the church.
Thank you, Jane. Further, any questions of the delegate? Seeing none, thank you. And I don't see any further hands. Oh, sorry. Come on up. Just need your name and municipality, but I'm probably going to guess it's Waterloo. Yeah.
My name is Andrea Henderson, and I live at 405 Wintergreen Drive, which is right across the street from the church. We want to keep the church. For me, it's just the density of the buildings when you have to do so many changes for parking and not enough green space. I think we should be able to come to some kind of compromise and still have the developers make sufficient money for purchasing the property. That's basically it. I do believe that the traffic will be a concern. I would like to have my visitors be able to park in front of my house and not have to park 2 streets down the road. If there's if there's a funeral at the church or Christmas or Easter, or like to have 1 parking spot per unit for residents, that's just not life, right? That's not our life. You need to have more parking spaces. it's, to me, it's very obvious that it's too dense for that small area. And that's basically all I have to say.
I do have one question for you, Councillor Vieth.
Thank you for coming, Andrea. What's it like there? I live in Old Lakeshore, so. But
It's already really congested. Like when I go to turn out to go onto Northfield in the morning, I have to wait.
and what about parking on the property, on the church property? Is it busy all the time?
No,
Is it okay?
no, it's not busy all the time. Half the time it's empty, totally empty, and other times it's jam-packed and everybody's on our street. So when you add to that, and the school's close by, it's just
Okay. All right. Thank you for
a little less dense.
Thank you
That's
for
all
coming.
I'm asking for. Thank you. Keep the church.
Thank you. Now, catch up on my package here. If there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Councillor Vieth.
I would like to move the motion as recommended with, sorry, something important that I have to read here. Bill 73 wording, zoning bylaw amendment Z 1812, 400 Northfield Drive West. Council agrees with planning staff, having considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders, and considered the professional opinions of planning staff. Council approves a zoning bylaw amendment Z-18-12, 400 Northfield Drive West, in accordance with Section 7, recommendations of IPPW 2019-2028, for the reasons specified in Section 6, conclusions of the report.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Henry does. And comments from council. Councillor, do you want to go first, or do you want to back clean up? Okay, she's going to back clean up. Councillor Bodley.
Through you, Your Worship. There was something that struck me from Mr. Sage's presentation, and it was finding a solution where everybody wins. And I really appreciate the delegate, Mr. Sage, and also Heather and Andrea coming forward, speaking to this. I think it's really important that we have engagement, and I appreciated our conversation on the weekend, Mr. Sage. And I don't want to accuse this of being a NIMBY conversation. We need to know what's going on in your backyard and what the opinions of people are in the backyards of decisions that we are making here. But I think in this situation, this is frankly just a situation where everybody can't win. I think that this new development accomplishes significant community benefit, including the continuation of the church as a strong pillar of the community. And I look at these decisions through a lens of a host of things that you and I talked about, Mr. Sage, on the weekend. One of them is the Countryside Line Initiative and making sure that we are not encroaching on the development into the townships and protecting our urban-rural mix. And that requires us to look at increased density where it's appropriate. And as Mr. Sage mentioned, this is on a main transit route that's eventually going to connect to the LRT. This is a place where increased density does make sense, in my opinion. And frankly, as I sort of intimated in my conversations, I actually think it's a little bit low compared to my perspective of where the city needs to go, considering the growth that we are facing in the city of Waterloo and the challenge we have for housing choice and supply for people in the region and in the city. In my ward, we have 2 potential developments that could be as high as 12 stories in similar neighborhoods. And for me, when I look at this, from my perspective, this does not overwhelm the neighborhood. It's similar to a number of developments that are further up Northfield, closer to Weber. And I know that change is difficult, And I respect and appreciate the delegates' comments today from the neighborhood. However, I'm confident myself that the new development, not only the new development, but the new residents that are going to move into the neighborhood as part of this development are going to, along with the church, contribute to the vibrancy of the community. And because of that, I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. Further commentary. Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I also wanted to thank the delegates that spoke today. I made a commitment to Mr. Sage last week that I would read the planning report, read the transportation report, give consideration to the concerns that were raised around traffic and parking and density. And my challenge is that the city went through an official planning process, which is a 20-year document. We spent 6 years doing that official planning process. We spent another 4 years doing our comprehensive zoning. And the density that's being recommended for this property is lower than what we even envisioned for it. So I feel like I can't say no based on a density perspective. The traffic report, I've never seen a traffic report that actually shows so little impact for an infill development. I'm used to seeing traffic reports that show me a level of service of failure everywhere and modifications that are different. Like changing timing on a traffic signal is an easy modification. In terms of sharing the public realm, like parking on our streets, for example, Rim Park hosts something called the Ontario Volleyball Championships every April for 5 weeks. If you've ever had a chance to drive in my ward, you would observe that there is no on-street parking in all of Carriage Crossing, all of Rim Park, all of Millennium Drive for 5 weeks. And that's an important aspect of recognizing how we live in community with each other. I also live in a ward that has 2 churches across the street from each other. Christ Lutheran is across the street from Waterloo Mennonite Brethren. Those churches, what they give back to our community for the on-street parking that they use in funerals and Easters and Christmas and community event planning is okay. Like I've never received complaints from my neighbors for on-street parking during these huge contributions that the churches make because they're just so important. And on the piece of parking, again, I feel bound by the work we've done as a city on comprehensive planning because we retain expert services to actually assess parking lots in the city to better understand how parking is utilized. And more people don't have 2-vehicle households. They have 1-vehicle households or no vehicle households. And we've shown that 1 parking stall per unit in many respects is too much for a 1-bedroom unit. And we've also found that visitor parking isn't needed. So this application exceeds the parking requirements, except for the 2 spots that Councillor Henry mentioned where the church is concerned. So I don't know, like I just feel like I've tried to look at all ways in which this application has failed to meet the test of planning and good planning, and height is another one. It's lower in height than what we would envision for this site. So for me, it feels like a fit when I compare it against all the tests that we've set up as a city, and I think we really need options in terms of housing stock around 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units, and maybe some families need a 3-bedroom here and there, but it feels like it's a good fit, and hopefully the people that move in might grow the church.
To Councillor Vasic now.
Thanks to you, Mayor Jaworski. I just wanted to speak to one other point about the traffic because when Mr. Sage and I spoke, I really did want to explore if that was possible to do that entryway onto Westmount. And so I just really wanted to highlight, based on what I hear from people who live around my area in Ward 5, I live right between Bridgeport and Erb, and I hear time and again that the smaller streets are used as a throughway to avoid the traffic congestion, which is, relatively pretty low just for short periods of time. And I hear over and over again how fearful they are for their kids who are playing in the front yards and for themselves. And so I just really, I'm taking, in addition to the comments from my colleagues here, I'm also taking this recommendation from staff very seriously, just because based on what I heard so much through the campaign and what I continue to hear about traffic calming and wishes for more traffic calming, that would be another reason to support this, the motion that Councillor Veith has put forward. But again, same as my colleagues, thank you so much for coming out, because you asked questions that we were able to ask and find out more information so that we can make a more informed decision. So thank you. It's such an important process, and it's not to diminish how grateful we are for all of your comments and questions.
Thank you. To Councillor Henry, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll pick up on that as well. I think when I go through the planning report and our documents and the tests that are relevant for changes on sites like these, there are a number of small planning issues to deal with, but the key planning issue is whether this is an appropriate site for stacked townhouses as a product, given it is in a node and it is in a corridor. We have specific tests that we've set out that the region will eventually approve, I'm sure, in our latest official plan amendments that Mr. Hawkins alluded to, and that those have been met on this site. And as Councillor Freeman had mentioned, this is perhaps one of the most ideal circumstances in terms of traffic and neighborhoods that we've seen for these kinds of sites. Certainly, major arterial roads that are backlotted that have an opportunity for intensification are very rare across the city. So they do require a specific look. Mr. Sage, I appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation earlier today, mostly to listen. Had you asked me my opinion, I'd have told you technically I have to wait until we close the hearing before I'm allowed to express one, so we couldn't have talked about that so that we hold a fair hearing. But I'll say this, as Councillor Freeman had mentioned, I undertook to take a look seriously at the traffic study to understand those impacts and what that looked like. And I'll just refer to Councillor Freeman's comments, because I found the same thing when looking at it and heard the same thing today, that the impact is about as minimal as you could normally expect, given virtually all of the traffic is directed out of the neighborhood fairly immediately, and the only question is how long you have to wait at the light. And based on the service level at the worst possible time of day, it's not a whole lot more, and it retains the same service level. So on that key question, there is not dramatic change that's proposed here that would concern me. And on some of the other matters that folks have raised, I think it's important to say two things. First, unlike some documents, zoning bylaws were not carved in stone and handed down to us. They are things that evolve, that reflect the considerations of the day, and that anticipate that individual sites will need an individual look at their context, that one size cannot fit all. And this, as a unique site, is an example of a place that cannot fit all. And in fact, it fits pretty well, considering how few amendments are ultimately required to make this succeed. And I'll run through them briefly, given the comments that were raised. First, in terms of the setback to low-density neighborhoods, our regulation anywhere in the city, and it's the same for the houses that back onto the church property, is 7.5 meters, or for larger developments, half the height of the building. In this case, that's less than 7.5 meters. What's the setback here? At least 8.4, so larger than the minimum setback that your own houses are required to meet, and that are required to meet for any low-density use abutting much more dense apartment places. I heard issues around landscape open space being insufficient. The requirements on this are 30% and lot coverage at 40%. This is way under on lot coverage and substantially over on landscape open space than is required in these. Those are facts, they're written down, and they're in the chart in the planning report. So it in fact exceeds those requirements in terms of open space and is not seeking variance. And I could go through some of those because those are plentiful. And in fact, the only requests for setback amendments and variances are about half the distance between the new zoning and the old zoning for the church. The church could have been much closer under its existing zoning as of right, but it's about half the distance between the two regulations. So the variances are narrow, relatively small, and fairly minimal in terms of impact. We recognize that change is a challenge, but as Councillor Bodley mentioned, change is necessary, and the question is how do you manage that properly in context? And I think this development does a reasonably good job of doing that, and it would be difficult to imagine it could do it much better. In fact, by preserving the low density designation that already exists here, it is about as low as one could expect for an intensification project of a site of this size that abuts two major roads and effectively outlets only towards them.
Thank you. And I would only add that, one, I'm glad to see the church is staying, Pastor Marty. That's something that's very much a key asset in our community. But moreover, I think I would have been disappointed if these had been single detached homes, large lots, as opposed to making such great use of the space that's there for lots of new citizens. So, Councillor Veith.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And really, after all that, there's not much more I can add, except thank you to all the delegations and to the church. Like to have the vision and to take the leap of faith to initiate a project like this. It reminds me of Knox Church in Uptown Waterloo. Like that, I remember when that happened, and that is a going concern now. The entire community uses that space. It's a community center. It's a meeting place for more than just the worshiping community. So congratulations to your community for doing that. And I'm excited that we're gonna be inviting new people to move to our neighborhood. I think this is these homes will appeal to a variety of folks. And the other cool thing too about our neighborhood is this is going to be, you won't need to have a vehicle to live there. We're close to transit. We're close to the church. We're close to the new development at the corporate campus now. So and transit, and the conservation area is right there. It's an amazing location for folks to move into. So the other, and looking into other people's backyard, I live in Old Lakeshore, and I can look out my back window and I see my neighbors as well. So sometimes I think that's not a bad thing that you eyes on the neighborhood. But I do want to make sure that when this goes to site plan, that there is discussion about the possibility of the driveway, accessible units, and the design. Like I know the pictures that came up there of those units are not what's being proposed. I want to see a really nice design of units on that property. So again, I'm excited about this and happy to support it. And thank you to my colleagues for supporting and for your kind words and wisdom. Thank you.
And then just one question for John. Some of the citizens asked, about fencing and have other outstanding questions that now, once we have a vote, they'll have more questions on. How can they get further information on that, like as it evolves? Is it just through the signing of the document at the back, or as this goes through site plan, when can they come by and see it or call for further information?
So the next step of the process would be the site plan application. It's not a public process.
Right.
But the design requirements that we have as standards throughout the city will ensure high quality of landscaping and potentially a fence along that property line. Those sort of details will be addressed. How that'll impact the adjacent homeowners, I don't know exactly how they'll be informed or connected, but I'm sure when the developer is putting up the fence, they'll have conversations with the homeowners as to how that fence will be installed, all those other considerations. But the exact requirement for consultation with the homeowners.
I didn't mean actually consultations, how they might stay informed. They can come to the second floor of
they're welcome to come to the counter and look at the plans and have discussions with staff. Yeah. That's definitely part of the process.
Thank you. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, that carried. Thank you, and thank everybody for a good, fulsome discussion tonight on this site. We're actually just in the final short strokes now. We have a communication and correspondence from the region. Everybody can see. Does somebody have any new business to discuss? Councillor Freeman.
Through Mayor Jaworski, I was thinking when you read the moment of reflection that maybe after we complete our strategic planning process, that maybe we could reconsider that moment of reflection in light of the language that we're developing around our vision and inclusivity and equity and that kind of thing.
I don't know if there's a particular process, but it's duly noted.
And then the other thing is I just wanted to let council know that I'm really super excited that the Waterloo Cycling Club have come and approached the city of Waterloo and are now entered into an agreement to rent Bechtel Park on Sunday, August the 18th, to run a mountain bike race. It's an intermediate level mountain bike race. They're expecting to bring 100 to 200 people to the city of Waterloo for that event. We've got an incredible team from our community services group, both from the cemetery side, the park side, we had this huge, and also our sport tourism side and our sponsorship side. We had a room full of excited people, and hopefully this will be the first of an annual event in that space. And I'm really excited about it. So I'm hoping people can mark their calendars. It'll be primarily the morning. It'll be 9 till, it's all day, but I think that the races will primarily run starting in the morning.
For any viewers who are wondering what's going on with the cemetery, the answer is probably absolutely nothing. They will not be racing through the cemetery.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because sometimes the cemetery is in use on a Sunday, especially for burials that need to happen within 24 hours. And so that was discussed at this meeting. Staff were really respectful of that. And so there was conversation about how the public announcement system could be modified if they needed more respectful space. And the section of the trail doesn't come out near the cemetery, so there's a visual there. And the one section of the cemetery that is typically used for burials within 24 hours is far further away from where this ride's supposed to be. So thought was given to that, actually.
Being no further new business, I know Councillor Bodley probably wants to enact some bylaws. He's been very keen tonight on moving things forward, keeping us on track. Well, then we're going to get stuck here. Moved by Councillor Veith and Councillor Henry. All those in favor? Motion to adjourn. Councillor Veith, Councillor Bodley, we're adjourned.